Maybe it is.
Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews. Welcome to Hardball. The U.S. military wanted terrorist al-Zarqawi dead or alive, and it looks like they got both. Today, the U.S. military confirmed that Zarqawi was still alive when authorities arrived at the bomb site, which destroyed his safe house in Iraq. Forces on the scene report that when loaded on the stretcher, Zarqawi appeared to recognize he was being held by the U.S. He attempted to roll off the stretcher and escape, but then mortally wounded, he died. In a moment, we'll talk about the Zarqawi kill with the man who led the war in Iraq from the get-go, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers. And later, I'll hold an exit interview, so-called, with Tom DeLay on his last day in the House of Representatives. Finally, it's Friday, and that also means we get the goods from the Hardball Hot Shots. Tonight, MSNBC host Rita Cosby and Tucker Carlson from the Tony Soprano's home state of New Jersey, and MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle from Boston, Mass. But first, we do politics. Hardball's David Schuster has this report on the latest in the al-Zarqawi story.
Days after a U.S. warplane bombed Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's hideout, military officials in Baghdad said today that Zarqawi probably died knowing he had been hit by Americans.
Zarqawi, in fact, did survive the airstrike. The report specifically states that nobody else did survive, though, from what they know.
According to military reports, Iraqi police were the first to arrive on the scene, finding 5 people dead and 1 man conscious but seriously wounded. The police placed the man on a stretcher. American troops arrived minutes later.
They immediately went to the person in the stretcher, were able to start identifying by some distinguishing marks on his body. They had some kind of visual facial recognition. Zarqawi attempted to sort of turn away off the stretcher. Everybody resecured him back onto the stretcher, but he died almost immediately thereafter from the wounds he had received from this airstrike.
Today at Camp David with the Prime Minister of Denmark, President Bush again called Zarqawi's death a significant step.
Removing Zarqawi is a major blow to al-Qaeda. It's not going to end the war. It's certainly not going to end the violence, but it's going to help a lot.
Even though Zarqawi was last pictured alive struggling with a jammed gun, he was skillful at grabbing headlines. The videotaped beheading of American hostage Nicholas Berg, the bombing of a Shiite shrine in Samarra, Iraq, which sparked widespread sectarian violence and mayhem, and the attack on a hotel in Jordan that killed 57 people. But security analysts believe Zarqawi's organization was only responsible for about 5% of all insurgent violence against the Shiites who dominate the new government. And 2 months ago, the Washington Post reported that the U.S. military was playing up Zarqawi's role as part of a propaganda campaign. Military documents cited by the report said one of the targets of that campaign was, quote, the U.S. home audience. Ever since 9/11, the Bush administration has sought to link Iraq with the terror organization responsible for the attacks. But U.S. officials have acknowledged that al-Qaeda did not exist in Iraq until after the U.S. invasion. And with Osama bin Laden still at large, some White House critics are wondering if the Bush administration used Zarqawi to put a different face on the terrorist America. In any case, a new AP Ipsos poll taken before Zarqawi's death shows that while Americans clearly oppose the Iraq war, support for the troops remains strong. Despite the allegations that U.S. Marines last fall massacred 24 Iraqi civilians in Haditha, the poll found that 61% of Americans believe the military is avoid civilian casualties. Still, a growing list of lawmakers argue the best way to support the troops is to bring them home. Today, President Bush repeated that the U.S. will leave Iraq when Iraqi forces can defend themselves and the government has stability.
We have to be patient here as this new democracy begins to flourish.
But the latest polling shows Americans do not believe democracy in Iraq is flourishing at all. And less than half believe Iraq will ever have a stable government. Finally, when asked whether the U.S. should have gone to war in Iraq in the first place, 59% said it was a mistake, a 25-point jump in just the last year and a half. The Bush administration continues to be cautious about the impact Zarqawi's death may have on the insurgency. Lowering expectations in a tough environment is always good politics, especially on a day like today when Iraqi gunmen kidnapped an oil minister, 7 bodies were found shot in the head, and continued car bombings forced the Iraqi government to close all major Baghdad roadways. I'm David Schuster for Hardball in Washington.
Thank you, David. General Richard Myers, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
This war, where is it headed right now after the Zarqawi death?
Well, I think one of the most significant things that happened in the same time frame was the appointment of the new Interior Minister, new Defense Minister. I think that, in the long term, is going to have more to do with Iraqis being successful in bringing their new government online than almost anything else that's happened here recently.
For the fighting men and women over there right now, how do they score this war? Is it catching the bad guys? We once had a deck of cards with their faces on them, or are we beyond that? Is it about establishing a secure government over there?
Oh, I think it's beyond that. I mean, there's certainly some bad guys that need to be caught. Somebody will replace Zarqawi. He was clearly al-Qaeda. He was clearly a very bad actor. We got some of his lieutenants. We're going to have to get more. So that's going to be part of it. But I think right now their focus is on helping Iraqi security forces, both Army and police, Air Forces or Navy, stand up so they can competently take care of this insurgency and support the government.
How do you get a government and a military with the stamina and the courage to stand up to such horrible people? They are frightening people. They behead people. What I've been reading is amazing about what they do to prisoners when they get them. How do you get that kind of guts in a new government, which has basically been put together now among the various groups?
Yeah, I think, well, we see some of it in the coalition forces and the Iraqi forces. My last conversation with General Casey was that the one thing that, through all the sectarian violence that stood out, was Iraqi security forces stood tall and acted appropriately. And now that they have leadership at the security level, Interior Ministry and Defense Ministry, I think they're in a position now to do just what you said.
Are you getting any reports about is there anything compared to the effectiveness of American forces and coalition forces coming out of Iraq right now? Are we seeing anything being replicated by the Iraqi people on the level of competence that you folks have shown?
Well, I think if people understand that U.S. forces are probably the most competent military force in the world and the most disciplined, the most professional, have the best training, the best equipment, best leadership, and all that. So it's a hard standard to match. What we have to make sure is that they're up to the task that they face in their own country, and that's what we're training them to, and hopefully one day they'll be as good as us. They have the will. The troops, the Iraqi troops and police that I met with, have the will and have the spirit. If they can get the right political leadership, I think they can make the grade.
Let's talk about the leadership on the other side, the bad guys, the ones we're fighting. What percent of, if you go into, when you were in battle over there, leading our troops and planning what we had to do over there, what percentage, in percentage terms, was al-Qaeda compared to the overall terrorist or insurgency we were facing over there, or are facing?
Well, obviously we went into major combat. There wasn't a strong link at all between Iraq and al-Qaeda, I think, as everybody pretty much acknowledges. I mean, some hints, but nothing concrete that I ever saw.
So you were fighting Iraqis.
We were fighting Iraqis and Sunni insurgents, and I still think that the primary insurgency is a Sunni-based insurgency there. Having said that, Zarqawi and al-Qaeda have the most spectacular events, hospitals. We saw the beheadings, the wedding in Jordan. I mean, they specialize in that, and they also specialize in trying to drive more sectarian violence. That was their specialty, to the point where even some of the al-Qaeda leadership didn't appreciate what they were doing. So very, very dangerous. So even though maybe not big in percentage of incidents, the incidents they did have, the number of Iraqis killed, certainly Zarqawi and the al-Qaeda had a major hand in that.
Do you believe that, you just alluded to it, do you believe that Zarqawi was an unpopular figure within the insurgency?
Not within the foreign fighters, certainly. With some in Iraq, absolutely, because obviously, as we talked about, as you just mentioned, Chris, and as your reporter did, he works through intimidation. So intimidation is a big part of how he gets the people to cooperate, and he's ruthless. And he'll kill them, kill their children, and I think so. Absolutely, and we'll see that. We may see some changes with him gone, because he's a clever leader.
When we pick up, American forces pick up a wounded enemy like him, he's clearly a combatant. He's not a citizen, or I mean a civilian standing around. He's Zarqawi. What are the rules on treatment of prisoners like that? When you picture he's in a stretcher, he's obviously trying to get out of the stretcher, according to these reports. He's obviously trying to escape, even though he's feeble at this point. What are the rules? You have to treat them like you would any wounded, or what?
Yes.
You have to guard yourself first.
What the president has said, and it's still standing, but he said it some time ago, is that while they're not entitled to the Geneva Conventions, people like Zarqawi, that they would treat them as if they were in accordance with the Geneva Convention. So,
do you have any more information about what this strange case where we arrived? American forces, the Iraqi forces had him in custody in a stretcher. He tried to shake loose of his stretcher, and then the American forces put him back in the stretcher. He died like immediately.
No, I don't know. Obviously, he was severely wounded and died shortly after the strike.
How good are these 500-pound bombs?
Well, it depends. I mean, they're 500-pound bombs.
We drop a couple thinking we got Saddam in the first couple days before the war.
We dropped several, and I think some larger than that. And as we heard reports of where Saddam might be, so we were actually during the war, as a matter of fact, and before the war as well. So, I mean, they're not the biggest weapon we have.
Well, how big a bang are they? They knock out a whole city block? Or?
Oh, no. They can be a lot more. They'll be more precise than that, and it would not have that kind of effect, as a matter of fact. But two of them in a building such as they struck would probably destroy the structure.
Do you have any evidence on how we found him? Was it the Jordanian Secret Service? Do you know how we pulled this out?
No, all I know is that from the time we started over there against this insurgency, we've had people tracking the Al-Qaeda, Zarqawi in particular, and his henchmen, and they've been working at this for a long time. There are reports that, for the last 3 weeks we've really been focusing on his spiritual advisor, but the fact is we've been tracking them for a long time, and we'll continue tracking the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That's a very dangerous threat. This is their central front for their battle, and they just can't be successful.
Al-Qaeda. Right. Thank you. We'll stay with General Myers. We'll be back with him in just a moment.